La 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 la. Okay. Good afternoon, United Water. This is Chris. How may I help you? Unfortunately, no. Lake Piru is closed to boarding and water recreation until at least Tuesday. We're having a staff meeting on Monday to review the new COVID-19 requirements. And we will make. No, because in addition to the accidental drowning of Ms. Rivera, there was also new issues from the governor and Center for Disease Control regarding the uptick in COVID-19 cases. So our public health and safety officers have been reviewing those changes, and we need to make sure that the lake can be in compliance before we reopen. Sorry. Yeah, if you check back with us, you can either call in, you can check our website, which is unitedwater.org, or the UWCD Lake Piru Facebook page. As soon as we have a reopen date, we'll plaster it across all those media sites. Yeah, but we'll definitely have a date on Monday afternoon. I appreciate your patience, and I'm sorry for disappointing you. Well, I understand that completely. Okay, very good. I look forward to it, and hopefully we can accommodate you then. You're welcome. Bye-bye. I thought you were on vacation, Mr. Emmert. Mr. Emmert, can you hear me?
I can.
Well, okay.
How are you this afternoon?
I thought you were on vacation.
I'm pretending.
That's not very.
I've mostly been.
I'm sorry?
I've mostly been.
Is that like a little?
Unfortunately, I haven't done that many things that were fun, but I have done some things that were necessary. So.
That sounds like a very grown-up vacation.
Yeah.
I see you're not in your office, Tony.
I'm not.
I actually saw your office in person this week. I stopped by and got lunch with John Lindquist on Tuesday. So he gave me a little tour of the new United building since I hadn't seen it.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. We
You
moved
haven't
in
seen
just.
the new building?
I hadn't. No, it's beautiful.
Come over.
I did on Tuesday.
It's still a little bit, it doesn't look like home yet, but it certainly is a nice building.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's very modern and spacious. And
Give us a couple of weeks, we'll trash the place.
There were a few weeks in there, Chris, I think, when you and I were the only two people in the building.
Lisa.
Those were the days. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Lisa.
How are you guys?
Doing well. There were some days I think we both came in at different times, and
I didn't even know you were here.
Right. I'm sure there were some days we never saw each other. The place is so big.
I know. I get my daily steps in just walking to get coffee 3 times a day.
Yeah.
Chris, do you still use those pitcher size coffee mugs? I remember.
What on earth are you talking about, Tim Moore?
I feel like I remember you having a very big coffee mug.
It's 1 cup a day, right? So what? It's 87 ounces.
1 cup, but not necessarily equal to the measurement a cup.
Mm-hmm.
It's the secret to my everlasting youth. copious amounts of caffeine.
You can see Tony's in Florida.
Steve O'Neill is joining us now.
Does have a timeshare there.
I'm phoning
Yeah.
in from my Key West office.
You have a nice breeze too.
That's right. It's pretty nice.
It's not messing up your hair. That's good.
Isn't that amazing? And it doesn't even mess up your hair there. This is like totally awesome Key West weather.
Hello.
Well, hey, Tony, this is Stephen O'Neill joining.
Hi, Stephen.
How you
Good
doing?
to have you.
Thanks for having me. How do I do it? There we go.
There he is.
There you are.
I've appeared.
Wow, there's a face we haven't seen in a while.
Yeah, I know. I moved back to the area. We started rebuilding my house. So
Nice.
Congratulations.
All right.
it's good to be close. Yeah.
Congratulations, sir.
Thank you, Chris.
I've been meaning to ask Dr. Kimball whether he was able to rebuild his house.
I don't know. Did he lose his house as well?
He lost his house with the Thomas fire.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I
That's
think the
now.
last time I talked to Rachel, she said the priority was to replant before the house.
Hmm.
Spoken like a true farmer.
Yeah.
We benefited from the Thomas fire in a way that a lot of the city of Ventura staff, inspectors, and some other administrators got hired by Malibu. And it's made a really significant difference in terms of getting things processed and, getting permits, et cetera. They've really
Wow.
speeded things up. It's been good.
We've been waiting 4 months for a permit from the city of Ventura to tear down our chimney, which is falling down on our house. It's taken 4 months to get a permit from them.
God.
Well, don't let it fall down, Tony. Don't let it fall down without a permit.
Exactly. I'll get in trouble for not having the fall down permit probably for that.
I
So,
think you need a demolition permit for that.
so the funny thing was my East Ventura track house, when we took the paperwork in, they said, oh, that's a mid-60s house. That's a historic property because
Oh,
of its
Lord.
age. And I said, no, it's a track house. It's not a historic property. So we had to go
Mid-century
around
modern.
We had to go around and take pictures of the neighborhood and our house and show how it looks like all the other houses in the neighborhood and everything. So it was really a lot of silliness that ate up the 4 months. So
Kelly and Ed have joined us now. I see.
Good evening or good afternoon.
Good
Hello,
afternoon.
sir.
hello.
Steve O'Neill, I saw you and I thought it was me.
I'm trying to look like Tony Emmert.
I think you're like a cross between the two.
Yeah, it's like you start off with one Ed or Tony, and then Steve's in the middle, and it's kind of like a transitional.
Oh, you put me at the wrong end of that, Chris.
No, I was starting with you.
The COVID do.
I was talking about the silver beard.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's very handsome.
Wait, let me record that and get my wife in here.
I'm recording the whole thing, so you got it on tape.
All right, all right.
Had any of the directors heard from Director Holmgren as to whether or not he'll be joining us this evening?
Have not.
I know Candace plans on participating because I got an email from her earlier. Just curious.
Chris, I had a couple of corrections to the minutes. Do you want me to give them to you now?
There's actually going to be several corrections to the minutes, I think, Director Kimball.
Okay.
So what I would like to request, though, is if you do have corrections to the minutes and they're not terribly extensive, if you could send me an email, because sometimes I have trouble distinguishing, especially letters.
Yep.
And that's a way to ensure that I get it right. But I think we'll address that later in our meeting.
Okay.
Correct.
All right.
Gordon, I'm going to suggest that we pull the approval of the minutes from the consent calendar and table those so we can do a little work on them.
Okay. That sounds.
My
Well,
apologies.
Do that.
All right. Hi, everyone. How's everyone doing?
There's a gift.
Oh,
Those are the Washington Hills.
No, that is in Camarillo, looking onto the lamb's backyard.
Mm.
It's here. I'll try to get out of the picture.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
my parents'
Wow.
backyard.
What a beautiful sky. Is that like pink sunset? Like a pink moment almost.
Yeah, that's about sunset. My parents' backyard in Camarillo.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So I figure I represent well.
Very nice.
All right. Do we have everybody on?
Right now, Candace is joining us, so I think we're good to go. The only director missing is Tim Holcomb so far.
Okay. I was just cruising through. I don't see him on.
No.
Okay.
Dan Detmer's joining us now. Nice turnout, you guys.
Mm. Yeah. And it's not even exciting yet.
It's always
Hottest
exciting, Gordon.
Hottest meeting in Fillmore.
Yeah. All right.
I muted myself, sorry. So hello, everyone. We will start the board meeting for July 16th, 2020 for the Fillmore Piru Groundwater Sustainable Agency, and I'd like to call this meeting to order. We'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. Ed, would you like to start us off? And I have a flag right here if you need one. Oh, you can't see it, sorry.
Okay, please
Okay.
cover your heart and recite with me the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, we will do is the roll call.
Director Holmgren is absent. Director Kimball is muted.
Sorry. Here
Thank you, sir.
somewhere.
Chair Long is here. Vice Chair McFadden,
Here.
Director
Okay.
Mencken.
I'm here. Hello, everyone.
Oh, Candace, your volume is very, very low. Is there any way for you to turn your volume up? Sorry. And Director Pace? I saw him.
I know he's here.
Yeah, he's here and he's unmuted, but I don't know where he went.
Okay. So we have 4 directors here today.
Yes, we do.
One is excused. All right, the next item is public comments. Do we have any public comments?
I don't see,
Anyone raising their hand in any fashion for public comments?
I don't see anyone. with a raise.
Okay. All right. Next up is the,
Whoop. Is that you, Kelly? The big K? You back?
sorry, I was flipping through and I hit the mute button. So no public comment. Next item is the approval of the agenda. And I understand there was the minutes for 3A that would be taken out.
Yeah,
Correct.
yeah, I'd like to pull the 3A from the consent calendar, and we can do that when the time comes, or we can do it now.
Okay, well, we'll pull that when we get to the consent calendar to have an independent vote on that one. Was there anything else?
No, Chair Long.
Okay, thank you. So then I need a motion to approve the agenda
So moved.
and a second.
Second?
So it's been motioned by Director McFadden and second by Director Kimball. Roll call, please.
Director Kimball?
Aye.
Director McFadden?
Aye.
Director Minigan?
Aye.
Director Pace? Still missing. And Chair Long?
Aye, so that motion is approved. All right, next item is our updates. So we have board comments, the Fillmore Puppers Association.
So we held our monthly board meeting this month, and let's see. The only item of significance was there was a discussion of Brian Bondi's desire to see things sooner rather than later, and so we discussed the Brown Act requirements, and he as a consultant also understands that the consultant likes to finish his work before it becomes public and not have it commented on during the process. On the other hand, he wants to see, that Glenn understood that. I'm sorry. And I think Brian probably does too as a consultant, but so we had a robust discussion about that and facilitating it, and how this, again, I reminded everybody that the GSP is not a document set in stone. It's actually, when we submit it, it's the first of probably many drafts and updates, and it will be an evolution. So hopefully it's up to the board of directors to keep the dialogue open and remind our consultants occasionally that their work can be an evolution as opposed to perfect the first time. So that's about it from Fillmore.
Great, thank you. Piru Pumpers?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. I got a new computer today, so that's what we're checking things. So, all right. I'm probably just echoing what Gordon said. So we've had our meetings, and we've started discussing and trying to get feedback and express to our pumpers that the importance of attending any meetings and providing us feedback for any concerns that they have as far as the GSP preparation. So we hopefully will see more of that feedback vocalized and use that as part of our outreach as we move forward in the GSP preparation.
All right, that's good. Environmental stakeholder.
We had our GDE webinar on June 19th, and we had 112 registrants with 100 viewers at one time. And that recording was made available to both Tony and Chris, and can be added to our website under resources. And I continue to participate in the Fox Canyon GMA stakeholder process with at meetings on June 25th and earlier today, just that's why I was a little bit late. Yeah, and that's all for now.
Okay, City of Fillmore is not there, but if, I don't believe there's any information on that. United Water?
I think everybody is aware of the sad tragedy that happened up at Lake Piru since our last meeting. It's been in the news, don't really need to go into that anymore. And I think that's all I have for tonight.
All right, for County of Ventura, we just making sure people know that we're going through our general plan process. There was a big planning commission today, just so that people know. Also, we had an industrial hemp meeting with APAC. And the reason why I bring that up is because with farming, water is a crucial issue. And so any type of crops new or whatever, I just wanted to make sure people knew what was going on. There is a seminar that I sent to Chris, Ed, and Tony today that's in regards to grant funding for inactive wells and so forth. Didn't know if that was something that our group would want any information on. It was sent through Lynn Rodriguez with the county for watershed. So I just wanted to make sure people knew that, and we can get that out for you. Also, COVID-19 is still going strong, and we're working very diligently with the Santa Clara Valley area in regards to Santa Paula, Fillmore, and Piru on testing, education, and making sure that our companies, our crucial infrastructure is still going on, such as the Packers and ag and all of that. But looks like people will be working from home for a little bit longer based on what the state governor has stated. I wish I could say a lot of positive things that are going on. But to me, positive would be that we've beaten this thing and is gone and done with, but we still have a lot of work to do. So just trying to sum it up really quick, because I'm sure you all are watching the news and everything. And I think that's it. So.
Oh, Kelly, I'd like to make a quick comment, compliment actually. The Ventura County Ag Commissioner has been providing both surgical masks and now N95 masks, which are critical for the N95 for pesticide use. And we've had companies that were just about ready to shut down because they didn't have those masks. They couldn't do the treatments that were needed. And we've distributed many of the surgical masks to our people just to use in transportation, and that's been very helpful. Those things are very hard to get a hold of. So thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up, because our ag commissioners team, our farm worker resources, the hospital, Santa Paula Hospital, and our clinics have been working together. La Grande Buena Star is working together. There's a lot of different organizations trying to make sure that we get the PPE and everything to communities, and they get tested and so forth. So they're working hard, even though we don't have a board meeting every week. It doesn't mean we're not getting stuff done. So, and our governor changes rules every week, every day. And so we just appreciate everyone working with us to really do the best we can for our community, both in health, mental, and physical, and also economical. So I think they're doing great things, I have to say.
Yeah, and to add to that, they've actually developed COVID guidance pamphlet, and they are going to be providing COVID training for employees on site, and as well as screening, in addition to the 400,000 masks that have been made available. So doing a great job there.
Yep.
It's not too hard for us to keep, in many cases, in some industries like mine, tree crops, it's not hard to keep people apart, but you got to have masks for when everybody piles into the car to go to and from work. That's probably the most critical part. So very helpful.
And also our businesses are safe, but then they go home and the home is not safe for whatever reason. And so trying to get that education both at the home and network and through transportation is really a key thing. We did have in Oxnard, we had the 216 bed farm worker housing where over 200 were positive. And so it just shows you that it can spread quickly and effectively. So what we can do to stop that spread would be really good. Luckily, fortunate for everyone, I don't believe anyone was put in the hospital. They might have gone, one might have gone to the hospital for something but came back.
We and other farmers I know have taken advantage of the doctors in training to come out on site and do a great job of educating. We do our own classes, but it's very, very helpful to have somebody who really knows what they're talking about coming out and talk to your workers.
Good, and I'll make sure I share that those thanks to the team as well. We were at Limonera for our press conference yesterday, talking about the Santa Clara Valley and the farm worker resources and all that we are doing in multiple different languages and working with our businesses. I think it went really well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item up is the executive director update. Tony?
You're on mute, Tony.
Before Tony starts, I wanted to let you know that Director Holmgren has joined the meeting.
Yes.
Welcome, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
As I could.
Director Holmgren, a few moments ago, we skipped past you, and if before I give the executive director's update, I just wanted to give you an opportunity if you had any City of Fillmore updates.
I appreciate that opportunity. Sorry for my lateness. No, nothing to report.
Well, good afternoon, Board of Directors. I have just a couple items to report on. I have been giving an ongoing receivables report, and I'm happy to report that our total receivables are down to a little over 80,000 at this point. So that was down from last month. So it was 80,132 as of the 8th of this month. A part of that is an invoice that Department of Water Resources is reviewing. And so the outstanding receivables on groundwater charges is 65,647, which is also better than it was. We still have one well from the fish hatchery that represents the largest outstanding groundwater charges. And I apologize, I said that I would follow up with Department of Fish and Wildlife, but I've been distracted by some litigation tasks in my day job, and I have not followed up with California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So that's still on my list, and I will follow up with my contacts there on why that particular one well has not been paid for. So that has usage that goes back to 2018. But we are headed in the right direction, and this is something that we talked about last time, perhaps putting an agenda item on a future board meeting, and we'd be happy to do that in August if your board would like to review that. I know we've been providing information to Vice Chair McFadden, and he has some ideas. And so at your pleasure, we can bring that back for future discussion. As far as the grant, we have received payment reimbursement from the state for all but invoice number 4. That was submitted some time ago, and our grant manager told us that with the timing of that we should not expect payment until the new fiscal year. And so now that we are in the new fiscal year, we expect payment on that one at some time within the next few weeks. And then we are working on preparing progress report and invoice number 5 due August 15th. So that's in works. From United standpoint, There has been continued work on the groundwater model. As last I heard, within the past 2 weeks or a week and a half ago, that model calibration continues to improve with extra effort. And Mr. Detmer can probably answer any detailed questions if you have any. But that's my my executive director's update for this evening.
Okay, thank you very much. We have legal counsel, Steve.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's also been a very quiet month on our end. As you know, Scott Nave was helping me cover some of the meetings, but I'm happy to report I've kind of moved out of Los Angeles and back into the neighborhood, so I hope to become a more regular participant. It's good to see everyone again, but in terms of the district's, the agency's business, we did some work working with Chris on a Public Records Act issue, but that's really been the extent of it. It's been a quiet 4 weeks since the last meeting, and that concludes my report.
How's the house coming along, Steve?
I finally, they finished grading today, and so I'm on, I guess, step one. But I've already experienced the 2-week delay and $10,000 increase. The joy of that in building. But we're on our way back, so it's good news. Thank you, Ed, for asking.
Congratulations. All right, GSP consultant update. Tony Morgan.
Evening, everybody. Let me share screen real quickly here with you. You should be seeing a screen, I think.
Have you sent these slides in, Tony? I haven't been apprised.
No, the PDFs have not been sent to you, Chris.
Okay. Just a reminder then.
All right, so this evening we've got our usual board discussion topics that we'll go through, and then we have 3 items that are directly related to GSP items. So United is going to help us go through the well moratorium review. That's item 5A, as well as 5B, which is the water budget with some information from the groundwater model review. And then I'll come back up and talk to you again about future conditions and what that term means within the context of the GSP document. So looking ahead, we're talking about future conditions here this evening. And we will also talk about the water budget. Then next month, we're going to talk about the annual reporting system. That's not necessarily a time critical item, but it's something I don't want us to get lost in, is that we do have to do annual reports to the DWR. And so I think it's appropriate just to touch on that to make sure everybody's aware of that. And then if we've got time in August, maybe September, depending on schedules and how the workflow goes, we may do some discussions of the data gap analysis that's being finalized, and also how that impacts the potential siting of the monitoring wells that you have some grant funds to support. So we'll think about trying to get that into August if we possibly can. If not, it'll slide into the September meeting agenda. Right. Any questions on those? Pretty straightforward. And so if you're looking for background information on the annual reports, there's some BMPs, the water budget and sustainable management criteria talk about the annual report in there. There's not a lot of information there. It does give you some idea of what information DWR is looking for. How much pumping, are there land use changes? How well are you targeting your sustainable goals, and just things like that. So it's a fairly rote kind of report, but nonetheless, it's an obligation that we need to deal with coming down the road. So questions on any of that?
Anyone? I think that's good. We'll have a lot more questions when we get to the information items.
Okay, I have one for the board.
Yep.
Is at past meetings we have made the premise that we would release the database system to the stakeholders after the July meeting. They got a sneak peek of it at the board meeting a few months ago, and then they got a little bit more at the recent workshop. And the concept was is that possibly at the July meeting, we would make the decision to go ahead and release that. So my question is the board comfortable with releasing that database management system for stakeholder use?
Can we talk about that within 5B, which is the water budget?
Or
I don't know if we can make decisions in the just the information update is what I'm trying to understand.
Okay.
Chair,
Yeah, it hasn't been
Madam Chair,
agendized for a motion or direction from the board.
Madam Chair, I would agree with that this is not agendized as an action item. So
Yes.
if there's an appropriate action item that's agendized that where this can be considered, I'd consider it then.
All right.
Thank
Very
you.
good
That's what I was thinking.
All right then. Thank you.
So would that be okay in 5B with the water budget? No?
No, sorry, Chair Long, but that's an information item.
Yeah.
Okay, so we will, if we can put
Nice
that
try, though.
on, I'm trying to be creative here within the guidelines. If we could then add it to a future topic for the next board meeting.
We can do that.
Absolutely.
We can bring it back next month as an item.
Okay. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Long,
Okay.
Chair-
Next item is, yes.
is a question, do we actually need a motion to approve the release?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Good questions. Okay, next item is the consent calendar. We're pulling out approval of the minutes. So let's, if I can get a motion to approve, or if there's any questions on 3B, 3C, and 3D.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar after removing 3A.
Thank you. Can I get a second? Can I get a second? Okay, so it's been first by Director McFadden, second by Director Pace. Any other discussion? If none, roll call, please.
Director Holmgren,
Yes.
Director Kimball,
Yes.
Director McFadden,
Aye.
Director Minigan,
Aye.
Director Pace,
Yes.
Chair Long.
Yes, so that motion is unanimous. Thank you very much. Now, next item is the approval of the minutes. Who is it that had questions or comments?
Chairman Long, our Chairperson Long, I think we just need to go through all the minutes, maybe polish a few portions, and I have some changes that I'd like to make in my part. I believe Candace does too.
Yeah.
And I think Gordon does too.
Yes, I do.
Shall we do this
Okay,
alphabetically? Start with Gordon?
Thank you.
Yep, I can. Mine was on page 8, the last paragraph, the first sentence. And let me find that.
Excuse me, Gordon. Chair Long, I think what I was suggesting earlier is that we pull the approval of the minutes and table it for the next meeting so we can go through the whole thing again.
I think that would be appropriate. It's not holding anything up in approving these minutes. So if we can, does anyone else have any problem with that?
That'll give us all the opportunity to make the changes, and we won't have to spend a lot of board time doing it.
Okay,
I
so
like the way you think. Email Chris your changes.
we'll roll the minutes over to the next meeting, making the changes that are provided by each director.
And so, Chris,
Yes.
Chris, the minutes should reflect that there was no action taken on this item.
Yes, thank you, Steve.
Okay, good decisions here. Okay, the next item is 4A, consider potential grant-funded regional sustainable groundwater management coordinator staff and administered by the Ventura County Resource Conservation District and provide district direction to staff. Who's taking this one?
I will.
Tony?
Chair Long? Yes. Chair Long and board, there has been some discussion for several weeks regarding a potential application for the Ventura County area for a grant that the California Department of Conservation has put out. They've recently put out their proposal solicitation package, and it is for a sustainable groundwater management watershed coordinator. And so there have been, and this is intended for high priority basins or critical basins, which we definitely have some of those in our area. And it is intended to enhance coordination between GSAs and different watersheds. And I think probably what DOC was really thinking of was some of the San Joaquin Valley basins that are in big trouble. And perhaps, like, you know, some of the basins have 2 or 3 or 4 GSAs. However, you know, we aren't quite in that kind of a critical and dire situation, but you know, there are some things that perhaps we could use in this area. So I believe Director Menigan and Brian Bondi and I have both been part of we have all 3 been part of discussions regarding this. And initially, I believe the county considered taking on this grant on behalf of all the GSAs and the basins in this area, and decided that it would be better for not to take that on. And I believe part of that is the county sort of has grant fatigue, or county staff, and several of the regional grants have been taken on by the county, and I think there's just not much capacity left to do that. So in these discussions, the agency that raised its hand is the Ventura County Resource Management Agency, which actually has a very good reputation for being sort of low overhead and providing ground level service, which is something that I think would be beneficial. So I'm supportive, in particular, of the Resource Conservation District or agency in administering this. The grant is up to $300,000 per award, or up to a 3-year period. And at best, if we were selected, my guess is there'll be a lot of competition for this, and we might not win out on the critical nature of our region. But you know, it looks like there probably will be an application going in. And so if it were to be awarded, that money would be available to hire probably likely a part-time person that would be working under the direction of Jamie Whiteford with the RCD, and would be working to enhance the things that all the GSAs are doing. So on the negative end, you know, we all have a lot going on, and just adding another voice in this could be a problem. However, I have witnessed Jamie being a person who has a pretty good handle on trying to provide value and being low overhead. So I'm encouraged by that. The person would become probably available sometime between springtime and summer of next year. So the earliest the grant would probably be awarded and the agreement would be in place would be, let's say, the end of March in 2021. So I was thinking about what we will be doing at that point and what we might use help for. So from probably January to June of 2021, we will be busily writing our GSPs because those will need to be finished by mid-year. So about this time next year, we'll be rolling drafts out for public comment. And then in the fall, we'll be incorporating those comments. And then of course, by December of 2021, we'll have to be wrapping up all those comments with an updated DSPs for our 2 basins. And then we'll be submitting those in January. So we're not going to have a whole lot of time for extensive other activities besides preparing our GSPs in the next year or so. But since the grant does last another couple years, so it would go out to potentially March of 2024, there could be some things that we could use help with on implementation and or coordination. So the things that I thought and the group thought of that could potentially be done during the time that we're preparing our GSPs would be to better bring in the Watershed Coalition of Ventura County and the Upper Basin IRWMP, the Integrated Regional Water Management Plan. Both share the same watershed coordinator. And I think that there could be some additional effort in trying to bring that group in for support. I think there could be some additional help that perhaps we could use to coordinate with the Watershed Coalition of Ventura County's outreach to disadvantaged communities. And Director Mennigan is involved in that, but I think we're really handcuffed on some of our outreach to disadvantaged communities in the next year or so because of COVID-19. I think it's going to be more difficult to have outreach to disadvantaged communities via Zoom than it was before. So maybe extra help could be used there. And then another idea that was put out was perhaps trying to inventory existing programs and projects. And so those would be things that would be ideas that we could consider and perhaps provide links on our website. So those are really the things that I thought of out of the menu of items that might be useful to us during the time we're working on our GSPs. After our GSPs are in, then we're working on implementing programs or projects and monitoring that are included in our GSPs. So that's really a new phase for us as the Fillmore and Piru GSA. And at that point, this person could perhaps help with enhancing with interbasin coordination. So if there are some things that need to be done, helping to put together meetings or that kind of thing, supporting projects and programs. And I believe that this was Director Mennigan's idea, was if there are things that we want to do that are projects or new programs, then this person could help us seek out and apply for grants for implementing those. So just as we did for monitoring wells, if something turns up in our plans that we want to do, perhaps this person could help with the next couple of years of being funded under the RCD to help put grants together. So those are the things that I've thought of with this. I honestly think in the next year to year and a half, it's going to be difficult for us to do. It's going to be a challenge just to get the stuff done that's before us. So to get the model finished, to get the scenarios put together, to do the outreach that's right before us, and to get our plans put together. But I think if we make that clear to the RCD that we only want help on these things if we ask, and not to have somebody out there that's doing something else or talking for your board or any of the others. I think we're looking for somebody to be helpful in anything that we would need. So the intent of this grant is to enhance the efforts of the GSAs and those that are working on groundwater sustainability issues, not to make them more complicated. So I believe that there could be some positives in this if we're very careful on saying what we want. And if your board is interested in that, then I will prepare a support letter. I believe actually we would have enough time to bring that back to the board at the August meeting, because the applications are due mid-September. So I think if we're able to communicate with those that are putting the application together soon, and then we were able to get a support letter by our August board meeting, then I think that would be plenty of time to get that in for the submittal. But I think what we're interested in today, or what I would like from your board, is whether this sounds like a good idea and you're supportive of that and would like us to flesh this out a little bit more, or it just seems like it's too much. Thank you.
Okay, directors, do you have any questions, comments?
I do.
Okay.
A couple of things. I have some concerns. I think with the whole Sigma GSA process of being a kind of a grassroots, stakeholders controlled process, and I don't quite understand how this would fit in, and I'm a little concerned about giving away stakeholder control to an outside entity. That's one concern.
Right.
Another concern would just be if there are hidden costs. Is this all paid for? Is this something that would be covered by our budget, or do we need to adjust our budget to do this? I don't believe in doing something just because you can. I believe in doing things because they serve a useful purpose. So the two of my concerns.
Okay. Anyone else concerns, comments?
Is there a way that we could see or get a copy of, or have emailed a copy of the grant application information so we can understand, so we can see what actually is being applied for, essentially for us, I guess?
Yes, we definitely could send you the grant proposal solicitation package and the ideas that on the agenda staff report. I bulletized the items on page 2, and I think those are the most productive ideas out of the ones that were put forth for us to consider. One of them I didn't mention was enhancing coordination between GSAs and agencies with land use authority. I don't really think that we want anybody to be working on that for us, because we already have on our board a member of the Board of Supervisors. We already have a member of the City Council of Fillmore, and I don't think we really need any extra help on that. To answer Vice Chair McFadden's question about local matching funds, it's my understanding that there is no local matching fund requirement for this grant. This is, I believe that most of the Department of Conservation's funding is from beverage container recycling. And so they just, if they have money from some of these, they put those out for a project. And I believe some of this also may be leftover funding from an earlier voter proposition, and they just wanted to get it out there and put it to work. So really, I think the first question is, do we see that any of these things that have been put forth would be helpful? I think the application or assistance in applying for grants, if you could find the right person, that might be something that would be very helpful, but about a year to a year and a half from now. So that, I don't think we're interested in applying for any grants right now, because we have enough work in front of us, and I don't think we're going to know what we want to do until we get further along in developing our plans.
Now that was a conversation we had a few meetings ago, where we want to be careful about planning for projects when we don't even have a GSP in place identifying what plans might be.
Correct. Yeah, I believe, yeah.
I was just gonna hop in and say,
Go ahead.
I think another role of this, because it's coordination amongst GSAs is to also give that landscape level approach to some of the ecological processes. But also when we look at gap analysis, if there's a need for further assessment, this person can write grants to pursue that further assessment on behalf of GSAs and fill those gaps.
I forgot to ask, is there any public comment on this item?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes, Brian.
This is Brian Bunny. I'm going to speak on behalf of Upper Ventura River Groundwater Agency. I'm the executive director of that GSA. We've been analyzing this as well as the Mound Basin, which I'm also executive director of. I'm speaking mostly from Upper Ventura River's perspective. We share the concerns that were expressed about, particularly in the realm of stakeholder outreach and messaging. Messaging is really important to the GSAs while you're working on your GSPs. And we're concerned about the person in this position, even if they're not trying to speak on behalf of the GSAs, being perceived as speaking on behalf of the GSAs during the critical time when we're issuing draft GSPs and trying to get comments and resolve people's concerns. So we're very concerned about that role. And really just anything in general where there's a perception, real or not, that that this position speaks on behalf of the GSAs on any matter. We would welcome support on grants, although we think going forward, grants are going to become competitive between the GSAs. So it's unclear to us how a regional coordinator is going to broker potential competing demands for limited grant funds for GSP implementation. So that's kind of a big question that remains in our area. So those boards have not weighed in on this, but I can tell you from the staff level for those agencies, I have those concerns. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. Is there any other public comments? Okay. I did want to ask about the job description. If we're going to go after a grant for a regional management coordinator, what exactly are they going to do? I think that has to be completely transparent, and I would need to get more information before I would say, yes, that's exactly what we want to do, because we're doing so much already for our GSPs.
Chair Long,
Sorry if you could hear me.
I think that is sort of what essentially the RCD is asking for, is ideas of things that this GSA and others, including the ones that Mr. Bondi represents, on what would be helpful. So if the answer is we have more concerns than we have enthusiasm, then your board can certainly answer thanks but no thanks. We're not going to oppose this, but we don't really think we need any help. Or if there are a few items on that list that we think we might, or it could quite possibly be, while we're putting our GSPs together, we really don't want anybody out there representing our GSA. It may be, see if, during that first year, we really don't want it. There might be an application that says, we'd like to accept this grant, but we'd like to put all $300,000 in years 2 and 3 and do nothing in the first year. I think backloading would be much more useful to us, because the most critical time for us is going to be the next year, as we're rolling out things that this GSA and other independent GSAs are putting together. I think that there's less use for this type of coordinator in this first part. So that could possibly be something that we say that we support this, but we support it more on the back end that helps us helps us with implementation and not on the front end while we're working on this critical time of putting our GSPs together and working with our stakeholders closely.
I mean, the one opportunity I see is the educating people on Sigma and stakeholder engagement, understanding water and so forth, especially if it was with RCD on that aspect, just the educational. I mean, we know already we have to be very cautious to make sure we're outreaching to everybody. So I would think maybe that's what we do, because we already have our consultants to do all the other things. And so just for my own thoughts, stakeholder engagement and education of the community would be something I would do.
Agreed.
Yeah, from my perspective, though, I hear Brian Bondi, and I think it just seems to me that we put a lot of effort and consultant time into our stakeholder outreach, and I think it needs to come from us. I think that our stakeholders need to hear us as directors, and not somebody speaking for us. If this was a position that was behind the scenes working, I'd have less concern. But I hear what Brian's saying, and I think that's a very valid point. If people go, wait a minute, who is this guy now? Well, I know him from RCD, or this new person nobody knows. Where did this come from, and who do they represent? Do they represent the Fillmore Piru GSA, or do they represent Fox Canyon? Or well, I think there's a potential for confusing and not keeping the focus on us by our stakeholders.
Okay.
So just another thought. It seems odd to get a grant to hire someone to have them look for more grants. That just seems counterproductive to me in a society. So that seems a little strange. But also, it just doesn't seem like we're going to need someone these first couple of years, as was mentioned, and or this first next year or whatever. I don't know how we would use someone. If we were under direct control by our board, it might be different. If it was someone that we were hiring to do a task that basically became our consultant, but coordinating with everyone, I think it sounds good in theory. Can we all get along and have someone just helping everybody work together? I just wonder if it's going to be more problematic and just another voice that is that doesn't add to bringing it all together, just causes more challenge for us. So I don't see the immediate benefit of having bringing in more resources to have someone to try to create a job, to try to figure out how to help us all get along, because we already have, the state already told us to do something, and it feels a little funny to me to need that position at present. But 3 years from now, maybe I wish I would have had a different point of view. I don't know.
Well, and I would agree. I would see maybe in the county's perspective with all the different GSAs and coordinating that. But as the RDC, I'm not as clear as to what this person would be doing.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in here. I think specifically the Department of Conservation funding is not for them to do anything within our GSA jurisdiction. It's specifically to work outside of GSAs, but to coordinate amongst everybody. So I think the grant's meant to pick up the gaps and the areas that aren't covered by GSAs, but then also providing that interface and coordination. That said, I think, we can circulate the job description. The point of the discussion is really to get feedback from folks about what would you want this person to do. I think a lot of folks have been having discussions about what they think would be beneficial, but it's also an opportunity for how you see this position supporting what our stakeholder consultant is mandated to do under contract, or see where there's a shortfall, where it's not being covered through our contract with Daniel B. Stevens. If there are has anything come up during the GSP process that isn't funded, that could be funded through this position. That's all.
I would think that Daniel B. Stevens would be pretty much on top of that as well. So it seems like a duplication to me. I don't mind learning more. I'd like to see a job description. I'd like to understand this a little better, but I personally couldn't support this tonight.
Okay, so I'm hearing that, Tony, if maybe you can get us more information and a job description, but I don't think any motion to approve would be, or I think that's the direction I'm hearing. Anyone else?
Sure, Lon. I think what I've heard is that there are, I will then circle back with this group that's considering this application. I think the comments that I've heard are very helpful. Some of these concerns have been brought up by others. So I definitely can circle back and let them know that that this board is preferring more behind the scenes, is very concerned with somebody that would take a leadership role and might be thought of as speaking for this board, and perhaps look into whether this could be backloaded. And that I think I did hear that also some basic additional education for the public on the Sigma and basic groundwater things might also be appreciated. But the board is very concerned that somebody might do harm, at least in this next year and a half. And perhaps there will be something that's thought of in the future, but not so much a glaring need in the very near future. So I can take some of that back to the group and also see what they've heard from other GSAs. Ryan Bondi just spoke for 2 other ones in the area. And so his comments were similar to what we've heard from you. So I can take that back and see what the RCD has come up with as far as a job description, and then I can bring that back to your board at the next meeting.
Tony, can you, sorry, just Chair Long, can you review what is the group? Are you talking about just the RCD, or are there a number of groups that have brought this to our agenda?
Vice Chair McFadden, there are a number of groups that have been involved. So both Chair Long and I are involved in the Santa Clara Valley, the Santa Clara River Watershed Committee, which too many different agencies. That's an agency that or an organization that has been working to try to bring grant funding in. Each of the 3 major watersheds has a committee, and there is also an effort in the Santa Clarita area upstream in our watershed. And then there's the Watershed Coalition of Ventura County, which is defined as an integrated regional water management planning agency. There's also one in the upper watershed. So all of those 3 watershed committees, the WCVC and the Santa Clarita one, have been involved, as well as I believe there's been outreach to either board members or staff from the individual GSAs. And there have also been members of county staff that have participated in those discussions. And Director Mennigan, am I leaving anybody else out?
I mean, I think the impetus is coming from the Integrated Regional Water Management Program that is housed by the county. And because they won't be taking on the grant, Ventura County Resource District has stepped up to be the fiscal sponsor to receive the grant from the Department of Conservation. But Tony captured all the groups, yeah.
So those are all the groups that have been involved in this. And I believe Jamie Whiteford volunteered the RCD because the county did not want to. I think it would have been more straightforward if it was just a $300,000 enhancement of the watershed coordinators, to which, you know, all various agencies pay into that. The cities and the districts pay into that for the Santa Clara watershed, but it isn't working out that way. So the RCD stepped up in this case and has volunteered. But they would mostly be acting as the fiscal agent and the ones that would probably hire a part-time person.
Okay, so I think we have more to come, so there'll be no motion that is taken on this item. And thank you for the information, and we'll get more details at the next meeting. The next item would be the 5A, which is review of the Ventura County well construction moratorium. So Dan, you're presenting this one? Or are you, Tony?
Dan Detmer is.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm presenting. Okay, good afternoon, Chair and board members. This should be pretty brief. I was asked to detail the current well ordinance that applies countywide. I will do so, it won't take very long. As you may know, the county for many years has been given authority by DWR to grant well permits within Ventura County. They have ordinance code that conditions a number of things for well construction, things such as sanitary seals, backflow prevention devices, screening across multiple aquifers. That's mostly in confined settings, and a lot of safety and sanitary type conditions as far as timeliness of well construction and construction issues. When the drought conditions became more severe in 2014, county supervisors were concerned about increased water use throughout the county, and they added some provisions to the county well ordinance 4468, which was intended to prevent increased use of groundwater use during these periods of drought. So they specifically allowed replacement wells or alternative sources for existing water uses, but their intent was really to prevent an expansion of use until such a time as a GSP is adopted for the various high and medium priority basins within the county. Okay, so that's where we still remain in many of the basins for the county. And at such a time that a GSP is submitted, the restriction is lifted, and the GSA may or may not implement their own conditions for new well permits. Okay, so currently, if the county receives a well permit and it's within and we've seen this a couple times at our board, if a well application comes in, as a courtesy, they show that application to the GSA, and the GSA can opine on whether they think it's a problem or not. There's also a variance condition allowed in the ordinance where the watershed director can issue a variance. But in the meantime, until we submit our plan, we have this no expansion of use of which we're informally involved. Once we do submit a plan, the GSA has the option to adopt their own restrictions or conditions on new water well permits. If the GSA chooses to do that, any application will be forwarded to the GSP before the county will issue a new permit. And if the GSA chooses not to do that, the county will go ahead and provide a copy of the new well permits once they're once they're issued, but they will not request comments from the GSA. So for the time being, until our GSP goes in, we're still responsive to this expansion of use prohibition. They seek our comments and allow variances if we choose to do so. But really, the board should think ahead to, once we adopt a GSP, if we're going to further this type of condition or apply other conditions on new well permits. And it's really about all there is to it.
Okay. Any questions for Dan? Any directors?
Thanks for the clarification, Dan. I think that's probably one of the top questions I get is concerning wells, and you've made it very clear.
Oh, good.
Do we have any public comment on this item? Seeing none, any other directors?
Yeah, I would note that the rescission of the moratorium is not automatic upon our submission. The wording is vague. I think it actually takes Board of Supervisors approval to lift it. It's not an automatic. So the board could still choose to leave it in place at that time.
I believe that's true.
Yeah, it's one paragraph within the code here, Director Kimball, section 4826.2, and it mentions the DWR designations, and it says, yeah, I think it's as I represented. I can look into that if you wish.
That would be good to clarify later, because the Board of Supervisors did put a well moratorium ordinance in. So how does that relate to DWR?
Yeah, this is the very one. So the 2014 provisions were a couple new minor sections toward the end of the standing ordinance that governs well permits and well construction. So there's just a couple paragraphs pointing to the high and medium priority basins designations, and staff represents that once those GSPs are submitted to DWR, it's automatically rescinded, but I can get clarity on that if you wish.
Yeah, I think this is like when with the Air Pollution Control District, where they can develop guidelines. The GSA can develop guidelines that are added to the county's permit to be met by the applicant. And so, you know, the county stipulations are there because they're the permitting authority, but we can add additional conditions or guidelines for approval of the permit.
Yeah, that's correct. But to Director Kimball's question, here's a county staff says, and I quote, after GSA has submitted their sustainability plan to DWR, the county moratorium is lifted, as was the case for Cuyama Basin. Once that happens, we provide a copy of their permit and do not ask for comments. So staff represents that it's automatic, not repeal, but you're excused from this condition and you pick it up yourself. But I can seek further clarity.
Well, I mean, that's staff. It just isn't in the ordinance.
Should I send it to Steve O'Neill?
No.
No,
I don't think.
I think staff needs to check with county council.
Well, and also, when do we need to know this by?
I think by the time we submit our GSP, what the handoff's going to look like.
Okay,
Yes.
so there's no rush on this, but we will need to know before then.
It is an element in the GSP, so we don't have to make a decision today, but at some point along the path, we need to make a decision how we'd like to do it.
I can make a note of that and follow up with county council if it's the board's pleasure.
Yeah.
I think that would be worthwhile. This is a question that this board has asked, and that's a reasonable question. I think there are a couple things that are really important in the meantime is, you know, are we or are we not going to have our own rules about this that we want to incorporate in our GSPs? It seems we should. At least I would recommend that we strongly consider having our own rules based upon our reality in our basins as the primary authority for this, and you know, no matter what the county does. But it seems like we should keep this in mind and think about it. And then in the meantime, until such time as we submit our GSPs, it seems like it's good to keep in mind if any other requests come up in the meantime, that it's important to remember that the emergency provisions that were added in 2014 were based upon a drought emergency, and they were intended to keep to control expansion of use, right? So I think what people had in mind is that I have a blank piece of land that I want to develop, and I'm going to put my holes in really fast before the door closes, and I'm going to develop my additional 500 acres or whatever. I think that was the kind of thing that the board was thinking about, not necessarily, or also, you know, if somebody had an urban development that they were wanting to move forward. I think that's less of what the county was thinking about, because there are already restrictions on some of that in most of the basin. I think as they come forward, I think it's important to keep in mind the purpose of that one was to prevent expansion of use. So if we're considering those, that's a good thing to keep in mind. But I think staff would urge that we do include our own thoughtful, you know, guidelines for those that are going to be using water, so they have a chance to think about this and to comment as we put things out for their consideration.
And let me just add here, a county in Northern California was sued and lost because they were a permitting authority on the Scott River, and groundwater pumping was negatively impacting endangered species. And so the county might approve the permit, and our guidelines also need to protect groundwater dependent ecosystem users such as species. And so we do want to make sure that the permit being issued, we aren't in any way liable for like those impacts on GDEs through this process either, in association with the county approving it. And we can safeguard ourselves against that by having the guidelines and the rules that Tony is suggesting.
Okay, thank you. So then Steve will follow up with county
That's correct.
council on that rule.
On the
Great.
ordinance.
This is an information item. So any other questions for Dan on this?
Steve, would you like me to send you the ordinance?
Oh, that would be great, Dan, if you just email it to me.
Sure.
And then tell him what part that we have in question.
Yep.
Okay, great. Next item is the water budget, and I believe we have Dr. Hanson, Zach,
Yes.
to lead us through this. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Let me get the screen up. Screen share. This one. All right. Let's see. You guys seeing the title page?
Nope.
No. The seeing the presenter swap.
Too far.
There. Now do you see it?
Nope.
Nope. Oh.
Not yet.
Okay. Let's see here. Try that. How did I do this last time?
Are you clicking on the green screen
Oh
share?
no, it's the whole, you gotta click the blue share button. That's it.
There you go.
All right, second time, still figuring it out. Okay.
There you go.
Now you guys are seeing the title page?
Yes.
All right, I think we're good to go then. Okay. So yes, I'm Zach Hansen. I'm with United Water Conservation District, and today I'll be presenting some information on the water budgets. If you begin to feel like you've seen some of these slides before, it's because you have, mainly the background slides. We'll get through those background slides as necessary, and then today I'll be presenting some preliminary water budget results that help us illustrate how the groundwater model informs us of the conditions in the basins, the dynamics of the basins, and in this case, we're looking at the current calibration period from 1985 onward to 2015. So kind of some background here in the context of Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, and Groundwater Sustainable Plan Development, or GSPs. Groundwater budgets are necessary for reporting as directed in the California Code of Regulations, which I've linked here, as well as Department of Water Resources has provided a number of resources to work off of in creating water budgets and placing them into the GSP. And so that's some background for anybody that's interested in reading up on those documents. But so what is a water budget to begin with? Well, a water budget is an accounting of all the water that flows into and out of a system. And in this case, it would be either of the GSA groundwater basin boundaries. This simple example that tracks this inflow and outflow and the change in storage helps us keep track of all of these components. And as you can see, if inflows are greater than outflows, your change in storage is going to rise. And we might see that in the water level elevations. If outflow is greater than inflow, your change in storage is going to decrease. And so we'll take that simple example and we'll see how the groundwater model helps us, because by extending that simple example to a more realistic setting, the complexity grows very quickly. So here we see we have our groundwater system, we have our land system, we have a surface water system, and they're all interacting together. And this is a figure out of DWR's handbook, where it shows the blue arrows as inflows into each of the systems and the orange arrows as outflows. And that's what we'll kind of focus on here with, you see stream flow coming into the system. You see maybe subsurface underflow, that's groundwater coming in from a different groundwater basin. And then on the exit side, we see stream flow out and groundwater out. In addition to that, we see all the precipitation falling, so that recharges into the groundwater system. We see groundwater extraction from various components such as agricultural pumping or riparian ET, and then we put those all together, and that's really the groundwater model helps us keep track of all these physical interactions in our basins. So in the context of the systems in Fillmore and Piru basins, we can kind of describe what that complex schematic looks like a little more simply. And so we'll see here we have Piru Basin and the storage that we can hold in the aquifers. We have the Fillmore Basin and its storage. And stream flow comes across from Los Angeles County, as well as some underflow coming across from Los Angeles County into Piru Basin. Then we'll walk through and we have Piru Creek with Santa Felicia Dam upstream flowing in. We have Hopper Creek, which is a minor tributary. We have surface water diversions off of those. We also have what's called surface water percolation, or that's the surface water that infiltrates through the stream bed into the groundwater basin. We also have rising groundwater when the water elevations in the basins rise up to a certain elevation that intersect the stream bed. It'll come and express itself as surface water now. We have that in all the tributaries. And then we also have groundwater pumping and riparian evapotranspiration, or ET. We have recharge from all sources, such as groundwater pumping that then infiltrates back into the ground, applied water, recharge water such from diversions and such. And then we have underflow coming from one basin to the other. As we know, all this is draining down due to gravity towards the Pacific Ocean. And so Piru drains into Fillmore via subsurface underflow. And we also have stream flow that flows in between. And then similar to Piru Basin, we have all those similar inputs and outflows as in Fillmore, just different names and different magnitudes in some cases, such as Sespe Creek, which is a major tributary into the system, Pole Creek. We have that rising and percolating water. We have groundwater pumping and riparian ET, recharge, and then all that flows down gradient into Santa Paula Basin. So that's, again, that kind of walks us through a simple schematic in our context here in Fillmore, Piru. And what the groundwater model helps us with is keeping track of all these interactions. And right now what we're calibrating to is really those groundwater elevations in the aquifers as well as stream flows. And that's what Dr. Sun presented back at the stakeholder workshop, showing the calibration technique. And so another point before we dive into the water budgets that we have calculated so far is that these systems are largely variable, or there's a large variability in these systems just due to the climatic forcings, rainfall. This plot shows water year rainfall in inches from 1850 to 2019. And this isn't Santa Paula, but it's a good proxy for what the valley is seeing. And we just see for over 150 years, we see just rises and falls. We have wet periods, we have dry periods coming out of a dry period, falls in, fills up, drains out, fills up, drains out. And so we just, these basins are largely driven by this variability and we'll see that in their water levels and in the calibration period, even what we're looking at in the late part of this century or last century. So we have wet years and we have variability. And what we're looking at is going to be in this water year 1986 to 2015. We'll be looking at the water budgets for each of these years for both of the basins. So while we're looking at the water budgets, we'll also be looking at observed water levels at 2 of the key wells in each of the basins. We have 29M2 here and 2A1, and both of these are in the valley floor. We have long-term records of them, and they help kind of explain by just looking at the, we see water levels rising, increase and decrease. It's kind of a proxy for that storage. And so I'm trying to relate, as we're looking at the water budgets, what is actually observed in these basins at these key wells. So this is really helpful because water levels can help us understand how the storage in the basin is changing, if it's increasing or decreasing. But the water budgets really help us explain why those changes are occurring, what processes are driving the change in storage one way or another. And so we'll begin with Piru Basin's some preliminary water budgets that we have here. Just to note, we're looking at water years 1986 to 2015. So that's a simulation date of October 1st, 1985 to September 30th, 2015. So a water year starts in October of the previous year and extends to like September 30th of 1986. So that would be water year 1986. And right now we're representing output from monthly simulations. And we just want to briefly note that we're currently exploring and implementing daily simulations just to improve calibration of surface waters, especially in downstream basins. But under daily simulations, we are still seeing good calibration in Fillmore and Piru. So these monthly results are expected to be still representative of what we're working toward for the final calibration. But we're just having some issues in largely Santa Paula Basin with some stream flow. And so we're trying to, that's what we've been working on the last little bit with converting from monthly to daily and trying to get those, just because the system is so flashy, meaning that we have those flood periods come in so quick and go away that we're trying to see if we can do a little bit better with the daily. So jumping into the water budgets, if you recall, change in storage is equal to the inflows and the outflows, and that's kind of a proxy for the water levels. So what I have here in the top, it's kind of we need to unpack it a little bit first, but we have just the key well here in Piru Basin. We have the water level over time over the water year period from 1986 to 2015. So as we walk through time, we see, well, it begins kind of at an average condition, and we kind of had a drought here, and then it peaked up, and you see that kind of the water level increases and decreases in time, more or less for most of the period, and then we hit that drought in 2013 to 2015, and it starts to decline. And so as we relate those water levels to what our change in storage, that's what I have plotted in this plot below. So what this is showing is the same thing, water year 1986 to 2015. And a bar chart, a bar above this line shows a net increase or net inflow, and below shows a net outflow. So if you just follow along, relating the water level with the net inflow and outflow for a given year, we kind of see we had net outflow for those years, so that drove that decrease in water levels or storage in the basin. And then we had a nice couple wet years here, and that filled it up, and that response was pretty quick. We note that Piru, that this basin fills up very rapidly with just one wet year, really, and then even more so in the second year. And then we see during this period in the 90s, as we had kind of dry, wet, it just oscillated up and down, more so than, so we have 93 here, we have 98, which was a wet year, we have 2005, which was a major wet year, and that oscillated, and then it drained out once we had no input into the system because we were running into the drought. So some major points that we see here is that the simulated water budgets that we have down here are capturing the fluctuations that we see in the observed key well. And the basins fill very quickly in this case, and they appear to fill a bit quicker than they drain. So we will move on to this next plot, which is even more to digest, but we'll walk through it. And with change in storage and water levels related to one another, we can break down that change in storage, like what drove that change in storage. So this is showing every water budget component that we're considering in the groundwater system, or that there's subwater components within these in some cases, but I'll walk you through here. So this is this is inflows on the top and outflows on the bottom. We have what's called underflow, which is this dark blue. That's underflow that's coming through the groundwater basin from LA County. We have stream percolation, or that's water that's infiltrating through the stream bed. And then we have mountain front recharge. That's ungauged mountain front drainages that are exactly that. They're not gauged, so they're not we don't have observations of them, but we can estimate how much water is flowing in and then ultimately into the groundwater basin. And then we have infiltration, which is made up of precipitation, applied water, pumped water, which is then infiltrates back in, and then diverted water off the surface water system into the groundwater system. So that's all the inflows that we're plotting right now. In the outflows, we have that underflow out. We have rising groundwater, which is groundwater that's leaving this groundwater system and entering into the stream. And then we have groundwater extractions and evapotranspiration. And one thing to note really is that, we have a lot more outflow in the underflow than we do the inflow here. Stream percolation and rising groundwater plays a huge role in Piru Basin. We see that with these light blue. That's all the stream percolation, and that's through storm flows. It's through Santa Felicia Dam releases out of Lake Piru, and it's also through flood flows that are held back into the spring from that flow from county line from Castaic Lake. And then we also have this groundwater that groundwater, rising groundwater. Also to note is right now, during our calibration, we're still implementing how riparian evapotranspiration is currently implemented is more towards the minimal side. So we're expecting to see evapotranspiration out of the riparian zones to increase in the near future here in our results. But then very briefly, in order to show all the components in relation to that water level, again, we kind of just see, you know, if we have a net positive, positives larger than the negative, you know, we're increasing a little bit, but then we decrease during those droughts. We rise up during these big flood events. We decrease a little bit, rise up, fall back, and so on. And so that really summarizes kind of how Piru Basin operates naturally and through the system, that, you know, in the absence of percolation, it's draining out into the Fillmore Basin essentially. And so with that, we'll move on to the Fillmore Basin and some of the draft water budgets that we're presenting. We're doing the same water years 1986 to 2015 and representing output for monthly simulations. So similar to Piru, I have the same type of figures. We have the key well that's located there. And we see here that because Piru is draining into Fillmore, actually stays full pretty frequently. And so it actually starts in the same time, 1986. It was almost at its like peak observed water level. And so during that drought period in the 80s, we saw it draw down, and then largely it just kind of oscillated back and forth as we had some wetter years, some drier years, wetter years, drier years, but it never went down as far or fluctuated as far as Piru. And that's largely because that underflow is always constantly leaking out of Piru into Fillmore Basin. But then once that faucet turns off, basically, once Piru doesn't have anything inflowing because we're entering that drought, Fillmore equally drains out into Santa Paula Basin. And so we can break that down into all of its components. Also, similar again, we have, you know, on the inflows, we have underflow coming in from Piru, and that's a large variable that plays into Fillmore's water budget. We have less percolation into Fillmore, and that's probably because all the water levels, if it's filled up, it just can't percolate as much. But then we have mountain front recharge again and infiltration from all the sources. Likewise, to Piru, we have outflow, but this time into Santa Paula Basin. We have rising groundwater. So that's groundwater exiting into the surface water features. And then we have groundwater extractions and evapotranspiration. And some of the main points to make here would be that streamflow plays less of a role as it did in Piru. And that's largely because the outflow, the underflow is becoming such a big factor. It's constantly draining out of the Piru Basin into the Fillmore Basin. And then lastly, I will note that groundwater extractions do play a larger role in comparison to Piru. And that makes sense because this basin, Fillmore, is twice the size as Piru. It also has, because of twice the size, it's got larger amount of users. So then we will kind of just show how, again, this plot follows that water level trend where we have, you know, some less inflow, though we do have some pretty constant inflow coming in from Piru, and then it fills up during wetter years, kind of stays relatively flat. But it should be also noted that the location of this key well in both of them, they're located along the valley floor, and so they might not be exactly representative. You might expect, like up in the Sespe uplands, that it drains out maybe a bit more, and we can show that in another presentation. But then again, during the drought, when Piru reduces, Piru's draining out still, but it just doesn't have as much inflow, such as stream flow from Sespe and whatnot. It's draining out as well. So we're happy to have shared some of those preliminary water budget results to help illustrate just how the groundwater model can inform us with the conditions and the dynamics of both of these basins during the calibration period that we're working on finalizing. Specifically, how does the groundwater model address several needs for the GSP development? Well, the basin boundaries have more recently changed, so we need to address that. We need to bring it up to speed with what DWR wants, which is more applicable timelines. Previous investigations dated back to the 30s and the 50s. And so that's we're informed, we're updating the whole system and all the quantification of everything. And then lastly, the groundwater model really shines because we're able to quantify all these budgets in such detail under historical, current, and future conditions. And the future conditions is actually what we're going to be talking about next. Tony Morgan, I think, will be discussing some future conditions in context of GSP development. So we can kind of think of maybe this variability in the context of all that, and what we're calibrating to this, which we have a nice draining. We had a pretty wet system during the 1990s and the 2000s, and then we captured another drought period. So we're calibrating to dry and wet periods, and then we can extend that into the past and into the future under various conditions. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time and open it up for any questions.
Well, thank you, Zach. I mean, that was very, very good information. I'm going to open it up to the directors. Directors, do you have any questions?
Will the PowerPoint be posted?
Yes. Yeah.
Those are terrific graphics. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Of course. Thank you.
Yeah, I think those are brilliant, and the water budgets for each basin, it really show the difference in the two basins. I mean, it's quite striking how the inflows are, how the flows are different, how the budget's made up. Very impressive. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, it was, it's a lot better than just about, I mean, in the GSP, we need to tabulate everything, but finally just illustrating it like this really helps paint the picture a little more clear.
Tim, Glenn, Candace, any questions or comments?
Just that it is an intense amount of information showing how a very complex system works. It was very educational, helpful for me, so I appreciate it very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Is there any public comments on this or any?
Brian Bondi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, I figured you'd have a comment.
But I don't have any comments on the conclusions of the numbers, I guess, and the reason for that is I really don't have anything to review. And sort of kind of getting back to the comments that Gordon made. You know, my job for the Pumpers Associations is to review the technical aspects. It's one of my jobs. So I'm just curious, you know, all this is coming from the groundwater model. What's the time frame that documentation of the model will be available, so there is something that like people like myself can review and actually be able to understand how those numbers were arrived at and provide feedback to the technical team on any questions or perhaps other considerations. So, you know, we're presenting results and conclusions, but you know, we don't have the information to review the basis for those results and conclusions. So I'm really interested in the timing of the model documentation and when we can take a look at that. Thank you.
Well, and also, Brian, that's a good question, is to the public receives it, and do they have 30 days to comment and then come back? What is the procedures? Those are good for us to know.
Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of information that is going into developing this model and the analysis. 30 days is not enough time for technical people to review all that and get up to speed, to be able to be in a position to even know if they have questions about these numbers. So I'm probably beating a dead horse, but I guess, you know, the sooner that the documentation of the model, and the reason I'm focused on the model is because that's the key tool for your GSP development. So the sooner that documentation is available, I think the better the process will go. If we get that documentation at the end, and then there's big concerns, the GSA and United are going to be in a very difficult position to address those. And I don't think anybody wants to be in that position. I'm not suggesting that that's what will happen, but if it does, it won't be good for anybody. So I'm just trying to see ahead and learn from the lessons that we had in Fox Canyon and try and make this go as smooth as possible. That's really where I'm coming from.
Thank you. Zach or Dan, Tony, any comments on that?
Yeah, I understand Brian's points, and you know, we're still developing this model. I would not call these results. These are preliminary output. They're representative. They're not final by any means, and I think Zach made that clear. We're in a rush to calibrate this model. We know there's interest in the documentation on the model, and we're going to do our best, you know, to publish these. We got two things. You know, as far as process, we've talked about process a couple times. We're calibrating through 2015. We're hoping to finish that by the end of the month, as Brian well knows. We're going to implement our 4-year validation period, do our sensitivity analysis, and publish that all at once. So the earliest the documentation is going to arrive is at least 3 months from now. So it may not be that early even. So I don't know quite how to answer Brian's question, because just like with the GMA, we're pressing the model into immediate use as it's coming to completion. So I understand those concerns, but I don't know that I have a satisfying answer for you right now.
We do need to make sure that we address it, because we also, not just only for IACUN, but for all of the public, needs to be able to understand it's part of the stakeholder engagement, right?
Yeah, when we feel that the models, you know, we'll have to coordinate with Tony Morgan, but we're going to have workshops on the model specifically, and then on the simulation. So I think we can share some specifics on model calibration before perhaps the documentation is finalized, and then we can work with Brian on that if that's what the board wants to happen, and the pumpers want to happen. But we're going to have a timing problem. Well, maybe not a problem, but you know, we're all trying to scramble to get this stuff done.
Could I make a comment? Maybe we need to look at this different, like in a little longer term. We need to do what we need to do to submit the draft GSP by January 2022. But as United has said, as Dan has said, the model isn't precise. There's always room for improvement. We're always learning. And part of that learning process, I think it may well be the review by stakeholders and comments by stakeholders. And for me as a director, I don't see the demand, or I don't see that when we submit the GSP that we quit listening to stakeholders. Actually, it's quite likely that the process will carry on, and we can continue to improve the model probably for the next 25 years.
I would agree with you, Gordon, in the fact that this is going to be a living document. Yes, it'll be the first time it gets out, and people will be examining it, and stakeholders will show us what's right and what's wrong. We'll be evolving together, so I get that. I understand the sooner we can get the information out, the better, and we will try our best to do that. I think that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and I would agree. As much as there's going to be evolution of the model and either continuous or periodic improvements, the GSA does need documentation to submit to make demonstrations about the quality of the model. We intend to provide that. It's just the timing elements that Brian's bringing up on having time to react. That may be difficult, and we're hopeful he doesn't have major problems with our model development. We have other experts, internal and external, working on it, and I think we're going to get there. I just don't quite know how to address his concerns.
Yeah, and I would offer that to second Dan's comments that we're pressing the model into use quickly after we're finishing the model, finishing in bunny ears, and so we're pushing the timeline pretty hard to make sure we get a product that we can use in the GSP preparation process. So, it'll take a little bit of time to pull all the documentation together, but I think once we get comfortable with that the model is where we want it to be for the degree of use in this GSP, not the future versions, but for this one, then we can come back to the board with more refined information and get away from saying, okay, these are our preliminary results, and we'll say, no, these are the results that we want to carry forward into the GSP. So tonight was a forward look, a sneak peek of kind of the general orders of magnitude that you see between the various elements within the groundwater budget. And the idea was to allow you to help calibrate your brains and your thinkings about what those kinds of numbers look like. It's very interesting to see the inflow and outflow numbers that are resulting out of the groundwater model. So that was the intent of this evening's presentation, was to get you oriented to that and to let you know that that kind of stuff we'll be presenting both back to the board as well as stakeholders at future meetings when we get more finalized with the information.
Okay, and I appreciate the PowerPoint presentation. Please make sure that preliminary are on those graphs as we're going to be using this for public. I want to make sure that people know that I think that's accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions, comments, concerns on this?
Can you hear me? Is my mic working?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead, Glenn.
So is there any way of, I guess I understand Brian's concern a little too, is this model is going to inform all the decisions for the GSP that we have to make as a GSA to set what's going to go on for the next 5 years, what we're going to set all our targets for. And if we get it at the last minute and we look at it, then all of our targets, if it's good, we're in good shape. If it's bad, all the targets are funny, and we have to go through that for the next 5 years. Is there any way of looking under the hood during development to see if there's anything, even though it's not a final product, it's stamped draft or something like that, so that from a stakeholder position as a groundwater pumper, that we have a consultant to look at it and say, hey, yeah, no, what they're doing, everything looks good, and take care of the concerns of our constituents? Or is there just no way of seeing anything besides these 15, 20 minute, half-hour presentations with a few things printed out? I'm just wondering if there's any way, understanding that it's not a final documentation, but it's things to look at to see how it's being prepared now.
So Tony, Morgan, I think the easiest way to answer that question is what does our grant schedule show that the model will be completed by?
About now, or maybe 30 days ago, we were supposed to have a functioning model that we could use. So that goes back to the comments that we're pushing the model into use just as soon as we get something that we feel comfortable with using. So that's kind of where we are. I mean, we slip a month right here, we'll still catch up and we'll get things done and incorporate it into the GSP. If we say we're not going to bless the model for another 8 to 10 months, we cannot wait that long. We cannot wait that long.
Yeah, but I'm also just heard Dan say 3 months from now, and that's not a guarantee either.
That's 3. I believe that Dan said that's 3 or 4 months on the documentation. Did I get that right, Dan?
Well, we hope to we hope to come to a point where we have a good enough calibration that we're willing to publish the model development and state of the model within 2 to 3 weeks. We're shooting for the end of July. Then we have those additional steps. The validation period will not be done by then. We need to go ahead and do the validation period, the 4-year update, and do some of the sensitivity demonstrations. So when we get to the point where we have a calibrated model, if this board wishes or the pumpers wish, we can work with Brian on some more detailed assessments. You know, but the documentation is just not going to be ready. But you know, Brian knows enough about modeling that he can look at the files and come to some of his own conclusions.
Yeah, that's fair.
Well, is there?
The only person.
Go ahead, Candace.
Brian's not the only person who might want to do that review, and I think, you know, we want to give everybody due time to do that sort of analysis. I don't mean to be. I've raised the concern in Daniel B. Stevens's report backs that we see the schedule, the grant deliverable schedule, so that we can see that we are on track. And we haven't been receiving those Gantt graph schedules to show that we are on track in the report backs. And even though we haven't seen them, I have asked questions related to, are we on track? And to hear now that we're actually 30 days behind and it's going to still take a few months is a little bit, you know, concerning, because we want to obviously keep everything on track to allow stakeholders due process with regards to review. So
I think I can help you a little bit with that. Is when I said we're 30 days behind schedule, that was 30 days behind schedule to have a working version of the model, not all the documentation done. So we're not that far off on having a working version of the model available for running a scenario should the board like to do that, or we want to get started with that for sustainable management criteria evaluation. So we're not that far off from that. It's the different timeline is when will the actual written documentation be available. That's to come later.
Yeah, and if we can do a workshop in the middle, I think Director Minigan is contemplating a paper review or a demonstration of calibrations and a bunch of presentations. I think Brian's contemplating a technical and numerical review where he wants to look at the model files. And those are two different things. Most of the public don't want the model files. They don't know what to do with them. I don't even know what to do with them. So, we need to allow people to have confidence in the model. We want that to happen. We know it's critical that people believe in the quality of the model so they can get behind the results. Because the first thing you do when you don't like the results is you whack on the model. You know, we're still seeing that rattle around the GMA, rightly or wrongly. So we know it's important, and we're sensitive to these timing issues, but you know, I'm sure you also understand we're reluctant to publish something before it's good.
No,
you know?
Of course. I mean, I'm not saying rush and compromise the work product. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I do want to be able to, at the monthly report backs, recognize based on schedules, projected schedules, whether or not we are on track, and what the concerns are and how we can get back on track. And I understand what Tony's saying is we have the ability to get back on track, but I just think it needs to be clearer if we are lagging behind on critical issues like this, so that we can ensure that we are making the progress that we need to, so that we are providing stakeholders the due time to review and provide input and feedback so that we can adequately address these things. Because what's clearly coming out of some other processes is that you know, stakeholder input is not being adequately addressed, and then it's being rushed, and people aren't having that sense of, you know, trust in the products. And that is definitely something we want to avoid.
Yeah, I would offer clearly, if I thought we were seriously behind on any of the timelines, trust me, you would have heard from me. The board would have heard from me at a monthly meeting that there was an issue and what the rectifying steps were going to be to get us back on track. But we're not in that situation.
And I would also, having watched the Fox Canyon process. First, I hope we as a board will handle this differently. But the other thing is, the reality is the legal or even 30 or 60 days isn't enough for review. The sort of that 30 or 60 days that's programmed into normal release of a study or a document or this thing isn't, in reality, it isn't long enough for even anybody to review it. I think probably, and I think you're seeing that in Fox Canyon, they're probably still getting comments and reviews. And so probably 6 months is more like for something this important and something this complex, and with such a broad group of stakeholders, I wouldn't be surprised if 6 months to review, to ask questions, to respond to questions is a more appropriate time scale. Maybe even a year. And the reality is we don't have that available. There's just too much work to do, always has been, in the time frame, even within the year more than we had than Fox Canyon had. So I think we're going to have to deal with continuing review and discussion with stakeholders after we submit the draft for review. And maybe it takes the water board a year to get back to us with their comments, questions, and we review them all at the same time. So as long as we don't consider that at the time we submit the GSP, we're through accepted public comment, or we're through listening to ideas or having stakeholder involvement, I think we can lessen some of the anxiety.
Can I ask someone who's been watching the Fox Canyon for a while, can you remind everyone what the issue was when they came out with the modeling? I understood it that they had public review. What was the problems and concerns with it? Because I think that United's probably learned a lot of lessons from it, but what were the outstanding things that we need to watch out for?
Well, some of the criticisms we didn't hear until the Las Postas adjudication got going, and then we heard criticisms we never heard during the whole TAC process. So that was interesting. And one of the other criticisms was the selection of the forward climate period and the way some of the droughts fell during the sustaining period and the coming to sustainability period. And there are some doubts about that. That's an important issue that, that's more not just the quality of the model, but that's your vision of the future. And is it the right vision or the realistic vision? So there's a lot of different elements that frankly many things can be criticized about what you do and what you imagine. But I don't know if somebody else here wants to add to that, but at this point we're focusing on the calibration. I think Brian's asking about the quality of the historical model and the calibration, and we're not yet talking about the future scenarios, right? And how well the model answers some of those sustainability questions. We haven't got there yet.
Yeah, from my perspective, I represented agriculture on the GMA's technical advisory group, and a couple things that were challenging. And again, this is not a criticism; it's what happened. A lot of numbers were presented before the model was considered done, which is not really happening. A little bit of that's happening here, but nothing to the degree of what happened in the GMA. I mean, we had entire water balances presented in draft GSPs before the model was finished with calibration. So we're on the right track with that. So I would get questions like, what do you think of these numbers? And as we got into the discussions about sustainable criteria, what do you think about these results? And I couldn't give an answer to the stakeholders I represented because the documentation of the model came later. So I wasn't able to do my job. And that's what I'm trying to avoid here for everybody's benefit. Because if there are concerns and other people have concerns, I think what we want to do is address those with the tools that we're using before your board is making policy decisions from the output of those tools. That's really where I think we want to avoid. And the GMA got behind on that. They were making policy decisions in the process of the GSP when we were still reviewing the tools. And that made people uncomfortable, or at least the people I talked to. And so I'm just trying to avoid that here for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, part of that was we rolled out draft water budgets because we were pressured to do so, and then there was additional calibration work, and that wasn't a good move. But Brian, I'm sure you understand our position. You orchestrated the development of the East Las Posas model, and you were under the same constraints, and you rolled it out. And we found some problems, and you rolled it back. So, you know,
I'm not criticizing. I'm not criticizing. I'm suggesting that we try and find a way to learn from those challenging positions we were both in and make this process better. That's all.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. The reason why I asked those questions is I like to uncover what could possibly be the issues so that we can try to be a little bit ahead of that and make sure we're prepared. I definitely agree. We are not Fox Canyon. We are not any other basin. We are the Fillmore Basin and the Piru Basin, and I know all of our directors our goal is to make sure we do it right. And so I want to make sure that the stakeholders are also engaged in the process personally, and it's mandated by the DWR also. And so I know we will do our best to do that. And so I think everyone's heard the comments. Anyone wants to state on this information item?
No.
All right. I got nothing from Ed. I thought you were going to come in on that one.
I could do just a little bit from the non-technical side. I attended a couple Fox Canyon stakeholder outreach workshops that it was more like a Fox Canyon presentation, and there was very little interaction with stakeholders. And I think that left and very little invitation to interaction with the stakeholders. And I think the fact that you, Kelly, run our board meetings less formally, and so there's an interaction with the audience, is a beginning. And the kind, I think there was a culture there that just made people feel like nobody was listening. And then they felt like, because of that, they felt like there was no point in speaking up. So then they didn't speak up, so you had no interaction. So from just a stakeholder outreach, I think it was a good example of how not to do it.
And building upon that set of observations on how the Fox Canyon process went, in particular their outreach efforts, that's why we spent a lot more time on the guiding principles and developing a communication and engagement plan that's far more detailed than what you'll find in the Fox Canyon. That was on purpose to try to get us into a position where we don't trip over the same speed bumps that they did.
And your stakeholders and your board members are going to ask, how do we get to this number? Why are we getting these? You know, what are our levels? And it'll go back to the modeling. So we'll all have those questions. And I think we'll need to make sure we can communicate that correctly.
I can guarantee that we're going to be held to account by our stakeholders at every step of the way. My neighbors are going to be after me.
Right, I agree. So thank you for everyone for speaking up, and I think this is how we become better. So thank you for the directors and our public comments. With that, I think that's the end of this information item for the water board. The last one I have is what's up for the next agenda for the next meeting. Our future, oh wait, no, sorry, I skipped one. Future conditions. So we've got Tony Morgan presenting this one. And then we'll think about what future items for our board topics. You could think of that while we're doing this.
right, have you got a slide there that you can see? Future conditions?
Mr. Morgan,
Yes.
will you please forward those slide presentations when you're finished as well? Thank you.
I'll send you a bill for a quarter, Chris, and I'll be happy to do so.
Thank you. I'll gladly pay it.
You're welcome. No problem. We're going to talk a little bit about future conditions this evening and get your brain oriented to what DWR means when they say future conditions. It's a necessary component of the GSP. We've touched on this item in multiple board meetings in the past where we say future climate change, what's pumping going to be, what's happening with wastewater effluent from LA County. We've talked about those things in broad strokes. And so I'm going to try to button those up into a package that lets you see how this all goes together. So the future conditions include a very wide variety of elements. And I got a list of example ones to show you there. And it's going to take input from stakeholders, regulators, directors, city council people. There's a lot of people who are going to weigh into this in various forms as we go along the process. So let's jump in here for a moment and talk about what DWR is meaning. So as you're well aware, we've got a deadline to get our GSP in by January 2022. Okay, we've got 20 years to implement that to get to our sustainability goals. Okay, and then beyond that, we've got a period of about 30 years that we have to demonstrate to DWR that we can maintain that. So what kicks this all off? So we're going to complete the Fillmore and Piru Basin GSPs. That's January 22. The 20-year clock starts ticking. Okay, but what we have to include in those GSPs is basically a vision for the future for the next 50 years. We've got a lot of information to compile over the next 50 years. So how do you go about that? What kind of elements do we need to deal with? And so we can make an example list right here of the kinds of things. And let's just look at the three categories. I kind of just stuffed them into three categories. They might move from one category to the other depending on one's perspective on how you view an item. It really doesn't matter which category you put them into. It's just a way to keep track of the elements and do a little bookkeeping on them. So there are some hydrology elements. And so we're going to need to figure out what the future precipitation is likely to look like. Are we going to get it exactly right? No, we can't predict the weather accurately next week, usually. So we have to have some idea of what we think the future precipitation is going to look like. And we'll talk about that again in a little bit more detail. We're going to have changes in evapotranspiration, surface water flows, runoff. All these are going to be imprinted by climate change. That's something that DWR is very hot on, that we need to make sure that we're wrestling. So we're going to have to come up with a way to give our best educated estimate as to what this future hydrology conditions are going to look like. There's other things that maybe are a little bit more easily dealt with. I call these the demand side elements. And so it's land use changes as one. So for example, population here, are we going to expand the city of Fillmore? Are you going to have 2,000 new houses there in the next 10 years? What's the city's plans for expansion? How much? When is it going to happen? Is that an expanded water demand? Remember, we're looking out 50 years. So this is the kind of information that we're going to be looking to wrap up. It doesn't mean you have to have it exactly correct. We know that it's an estimate, an educated estimate, but an estimate. So you're going to buff up your crystal ball as best you can and begin to look at what's going to happen in the future. Same thing for agriculture. Is agricultural land use going to expand? Well, if so, well, how much? Where is it going to happen? When do you think that's going to happen? When, meaning within your 50-year time window. Is that going to be an expansion of demand? Are there going to be higher water intensity used crops or not? So we need to have a conversation as to what will we think the future is really going to look like in the context of having climate change. Maybe it's a little bit warmer. We've got more evapotranspiration to deal with. So what does that mean for our future agricultural operations in the area? And all of these wrap around land use changes in general and the groundwater extraction implications associated with them. So If we look at the supply side elements, there's a lot of things listed here. The first one is proposed projects. And I think if you look at the last one, I have a Rundo removal down there as an example. I probably could have moved that up and as a proposed projects. But we have a lot of things we have to do. So what do we think future Lake Piru conservation releases are going to look like? Well, how often are those going to occur? Are they still going to be annual? And when during the year are they going to be? And what amount of water do we think they're going to be? All of those go into the model when we're preparing our future scenarios. Same thing for migration releases. Is that something that United believes is going to happen? And you're going to get pressured by regulators to do migration releases in addition or coupled with conservation releases? We're going to have to figure that out. Does the agency want to participate in Article 21 waters purchases when those become available? If the answer is yes, are you prepared to accumulate the war chest of money you're going to need to be able to purchase that water when it becomes available? Well, how often is it going to be available? When during the year do we think it's going to be delivered? We probably have a pretty good idea of when it's going to be in the amount of the year, in the time of year. But what amount of water do we want to put in there? And again, we're going to make some assumptions about these. How often? We got a little bit of help in that the state DWR put together some information on how frequently they think reservoirs are going to be full in Northern California and things like that. So we might be able to use that as a guide to say how often do we think Article 21 water is going to be available. But the big thing is, does this agency think that it wishes to purchase water in addition to whatever United might do, for example? And if that's the case, and if we say, it's going to happen every 7 years, and we're going to buy 10,000 acre feet every 7 years. Okay, well then we have a budget for that. That goes into the cost of implementation of the GSP down the road. But we put this information about how much water, how frequently, into the forward-looking groundwater scenarios. Same thing, there's been talk about buying supplemental water. Are there other water banks, for example, and participants in those water banks who maybe have a short-term or a long-term surplus of water, and right now they need cash more than they need water, and so they're ready to put water on the market to be sold? And is this agency going to be in a position or have a desire to be ready to buy some of that supplemental water out there and add it to the basin? So that kind of decision is really very important. On a slightly different note, let's talk about what's happening with the wastewater treatment plant for Piru. There's been conversations about effluent going to ag. Well, is that going to happen on a large scale? Is that, where is that water going? How much of that water is there? Is it a replacement for agricultural pumping, or is it an addition to agricultural pumping? So those kinds of questions we need some help figuring out. City of Fillmore's wastewater treatment plant, are you considering in the future having a recycled program where you're going to pull some of that water back and use it on parks, ball fields, that kind of thing? Or maybe you're going to require the new housing developments that come into the city to be dual plumbed so that they can handle recycled water outside of the home and potable water inside of the home. So again, questions about how much, timing, and that kind of thing are critical to try to nail down to the extent we can. A big one that we've talked about multiple times is what's going to happen to the wastewater effluent that is discharged to the Santa Clara River from the upstream Saugus and Valencia plants. We purely expect there to be a change in that quantity, probably a decrease, a significant decrease in that. So how much is that decrease actually going to be? What's the timing on that decrease, on that ramp down of that water? So that can be factored into the model also. It's, incumbent on us to figure out what might be coming from outside of the basin as well. So there are releases out of Castaic Lake from their operations. There's also releases that contain the downstream water users flow. So United monitors and keeps a running tab, if you will, of the amount of runoff that's captured in the Castaic Lake that is entitled for the downstream users, and they usually release that in conjunction with other releases and piggyback it on with a Lake Piru release, or maybe something if they buy Article 21 water and it comes through Castaic, they'll piggyback it on with that to get it down the Santa Clara River more completely. So we need to have some discussions about what do we think that is, if we have climate models, if we have our surface water flow model, and we have the upper rivers, the upper Santa Clara River basins folks model as well. We'll be taking a look at their input as to what they think surface water is going to look like coming into the lake there. So there's a lot of things that when you say future conditions, the first thing most people think of is, oh, we got to figure out precipitation, but it's a lot more than that. It's not just precipitation. And so just to graphically emphasize what we're being asked to do, here we are today. This is the precipitation record for the fish hatchery. So they're asking us, they being DWR, are asking us to fill this in. Fill this graph in. So here's your precipitation in inches per water year, and you've got an average of about a little over 18 inches, a median about just a hair over 16 inches. And so what can you do? Well, some people just say, do that. Clone it and plug it onto the end and go. Well, that's certainly one approach, but things we want to be sure that we're looking at is what's going on at the compliance points. So in 2042, we have to convince DWR that we've met our sustainability goals. And they also want to see that you can maintain those sustainability goals out through 2072, your total 50-year window. And so we're going to take a look at this and pick a period, a hydrologic period in here that is realistic. Realistic meaning maybe the hydrologic period has an average precipitation that mimics what we see over the existing record that we have, that we encompass both wet and dry cycles there. The cumulative departure is balanced out within that period. And we'll have board conversations about what would you like the near-term future to look like in these forward scenarios. It doesn't mean they're going to look like that in the real world. That will be whatever the weather patterns are. So do you want to start the next 2 years right after we submit the GSP and say those are going to be drought years, and then we're going to have a couple of wet years to go and balance that out? We will be moving these wet and dry periods around to be able to balance that out. So for example, do you want something that looks like, here's the the 1970s drought that looks like this, and then there's a period of 3 years that are really above average precipitation that brought us back out of that. Here's the late 1980s drought. In the early 90s, you had like 5 years out of, 3 years or 4 years out of 5 that were average or above average. That brought us back out of that drought situation right there. So where do we want those events to occur in here? What's the sequence of wet, dry, and average years that we're going to do? But one of the things we want to be careful is we don't want to set ourselves up with a scenario where, for example, if 2042 is our compliance point here for sustainability in the eyes of DWR, we probably don't want to end up with a scenario where the 5 years right before that are mimicking historic drought conditions in our forward-looking models. Doesn't mean that's what the conditions are going to be in the future, but DWR is going to be looking at your forward forecast and saying, gee, you've had 5 years, and so by 2042, you don't meet your sustainability goals then. So we'll look at all of these and come up with this, and we've had some initial meetings to begin to talk with United, and Brian Bondi was there as a participant in that meeting as well, and figure out how we're going to overlay this new period of precipitation on there. We're free to adjust as we deem appropriate, but once we pick this sequence of wet, dry, and average years and lay them on here, then the overprint of climate change goes on top of that. What are we saying? Is there going to be wetter, drier, more ET, that kind of thing? Will overprint over the top of this. So maybe your precipitation is higher in the extreme event years and lower in the low years. So we'll see what that turns out to be. But this is the kind of the technical stuff that we're wading into now because we've got all the data available and categorized for it. So there were a lot of things on the chart that needed to be talked about. And here's some examples of what we think might be primary responsibilities for making the decisions on how we're going to go. Certain things like Lake Piru conservation releases and migration releases, and at least the Article 21 purchases by United. Well, those are very clearly decisions where United is going to make the primary decision as to what that looks like. So we're expecting that they will provide us with a series of scenarios where, okay, Lake Piru conservations are going to be annual. They're going to be between this week and this week in the year. We'll plug those into the model. We think they're going to average 10,000 acre feet a year, or we look at the climate that we have forecast and we say in wetter years, we're going to release more. In drier years, we're going to release less. Those are things that United will take the lead in figuring out that for implementing into the scenario. Whether or not the agency buys Article 21 water themselves, that's you, with input from your stakeholders as to whether they want you to do that. Are they willing to pay a little extra on their acre foot charges to be able to have funds available when the Article 21 water is ready to go? So as we look through these, you'll see some P's and S's in there, meaning just primary and sort of secondary responsibilities for thinking about and making the decisions on what these future conditions are going to look like. So there's land use changes. So we've got City of Fillmore talking about their area, County of Ventura talking about the town of Piru, for example. Same thing for both of their population growths associated with that. Let's see, Upper Valencia Saugus plant, effluent, that's a decision by LA County Sanitation District, in addition to the upstream GSA. And what do they think they're going to put into their groundwater flow model? So this is not meant to be the final, descriptor of all the possible elements that we might need to deal with, but it's meant to say we've got a lot of things that we have to wrestle into submission when we prepare these scenarios for doing future conditions. It's not just what do we think groundwater pumping is going to be and what do we think the rainfall is going to look like. It's far more comprehensive than that. And these are the things that DWR calls out in their various documents, saying they want you to consider ag expansion, population growth, land use changes, climate change. All those kinds of things are factors in that. Are there any thoughts or questions about this? I'm pretty much through what I wanted to say on these topics now, and I want to give you a chance to respond to anything there.
So Tony, I had a comment. LA County is one of their biggest developments is New Hall Ranch in the upper watershed.
Yeah.
And they're saying that the main source of water is going to be from groundwater that was traditionally used for ag, that's going to supply those homes. And I think that might be another one to add to the table for consideration on impacts, especially with regards to the interbasin coordinatory agreements. Because I know that inflow is definitely going to be impacted.
And that's totally valid comment. And we're attempting to arrange a meeting right now to meet with the Santa Clara Valley water folks and their consultant, which is GSI Water, I believe it is, for that, and talk to them about their model and what they're assuming for that. Because what we really care about is what's happening at the basin boundary, what water is coming forward into the Piru Basin. And so what assumptions are they make? And to that end, we're trying to get to a point where, I think I mentioned this at the stakeholder meeting, we're trying to get to a point where the Santa Clarita folks, this agency, and the Mound Basin and maybe Santa Paula to some degree, they're not subject to GSP preparation requirement, but the Mound Basin for sure is try to get a consistent set of future conditions so that, number one, minimize the number of runs that United has to do on the model. So let's all talk about what the future precipitation sequence is going to look like. Let's all talk about climate change. Let's do those things. Now, there are individual changes as far as land use within the basin, so that's a basin-specific topic. But the bigger things we're talking about, trying to get everyone to agree and come up with a consistent set of elements that will be included in the forward-looking forecast. That eliminates some of the problems that they saw in the Central Valley. There's been a couple of groups that have done some reviews of the early GSPs that were put in for those critically overdrafted basins. And some of those comments that they got is like, oh, well, Basin A says they're going to take all the excess water out of the river. And then immediately downstream, Basin B says they're going to take all the excess water out of the river. And Basin C says, no, we're going to take all the excess water out of the river. We're trying to avoid that kind of confusion and get everybody in the river basin to be on a consistent set of conditions. So that's a big coordination effort, and we started that with United and with Brian Bondi as the representative for Mound, and we're trying to pin down the upstream guys that we can get a meeting with them to begin to pick their brain about it. And we also need to know timing from them about when is their model going to be ready so that we can begin to use the output from their model at the Piru upper river boundary as input into Piru.
Are we tracking the status of pyramids for licensing? Because that's also going to be, overseeing releases from Pyramid Dam and that's a 50-year license. And that's inputs into Piru Lake and obviously impacts.
Right, and so in my mind, that all gets rolled up into United's evaluation of what do they think future conservation releases are going to look like. And so if there's some change in how Pyramid's going to operate in the future, well, United will factor that in to the extent that we can know as we look out this far what that might look like.
Okay.
So it's a daunting task. There's lots of questions to be addressed. It doesn't mean that all the questions have to be known to the nth degree. We don't need third decimal point precision on these things, but we do need to have some conversations. For example, with the city of Fillmore, what does your general plan say? Are you guys comfortable with that? But your general plan may or may not look out 50 years. So we need to have some idea of what you think is going to happen in the city as far as development. Is land use going to change? Are you ramping down your groundwater pumping because you're putting in more mandatory conservation efforts? Are you looking to make use of recycled water in the future? And that kind of thing. So there's lots of little decisions that we realize will probably change with every 5-year update to the GSP, but we have to start someplace. And so that's where we are right now, is beginning to talk about the data needs and then beginning to formulate a plan for how we're going to find all this information.
All right. Any other directors have any questions? I'm sorry I got kicked off. I did have a question in regards to, we had stated with our stakeholder engagement and so forth that this type of issues would be coming to our board as a whole. And I just want to always ask, do we need a technical committee for this? Or can you make most of these decisions and then bring it to us? I want to make sure we agree as the will of the board how we're approaching this for future conditions and how we get those numbers.
I mean, we, the technical team, are not necessarily going to make all of the decisions. Some of those will be done by the board. There'll be board level decisions. But I think it's most expedient for the technical folks to put together the straw man for the board to talk about and to consider. And here's option A, here's option B on the straw man. What does the board think about that? And use that kind of approach for this. In addition, these will be elements that will be part of stakeholder outreach as well. So we'll have conversations about future projects, land use, those kinds of things.
Okay, so then if that's the case, can you make sure that the documentation that we're going to be reviewing for the meeting is there so that public has a chance to review it and so forth, so we get as much access to the material so we can have a good discussion on it?
Sure. Sure.
Okay. Are there any public comments on this future conditions item? I don't see any. Okay, any other directors? Again, I want to make sure I ask you as well if there's any questions. Or Tony Emmerich, do you have any questions from United?
No, Chair Long, we will work with the consultant to flesh this out as much as possible, and we completely get that the board wants to be involved in as much of this as possible. So we'll do what we can to make that happen.
Thank you. And also just, I do agree with Candace's earlier conversation about our chart, our timeline, as we look at our budget, making sure that we have our timeline accessible so that anyone public-wise could be knowing where we are.
And I think the last time we discussed that was probably meeting before last.
Yes, probably, but it's always good. All right, so if we are done with our future conditions, we are up to future topics for board discussion. Are there any of the board directors need to add anything for next month? Our next meeting will be August 20th.
We talked about having a receivables update for board review.
Right, and then we also talked about releasing the data. Correct?
Database.
I think
yeah.
Tony Morgan
Yes.
asked that.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
please.
Okay, so that'll be up. Do we need to have the information from council on the well moratorium by next meeting? If you can do it, great. If not, don't kill yourself.
I'm sorry, I
would
was muted.
do that.
Yeah, I plan to have it well in advance of that.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else that we need to make sure we're covering?
Just one quick question, Chair Long. The accounts receivable update, is that a motion item? Is staff looking for direction from the board on how to handle the outstanding accounts receivable?
I think it's a
Ed,
potential.
do you want to elaborate?
Well, Tony, I was going to say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, we need to decide how we're going to handle some of the long overdue invoices.
Okay.
Correct. Chair Long and Vice Chair McFadden, I would recommend that we set that up as a motion item, but maybe it be a less specific motion item that says, receive a report and provide input.
Direction.
Direction, yeah.
So yeah, I think we want the board to be able to give definite direction if they have it.
Okay. Good, thank you for the clarification. Yeah, good for the clarification. All right, and if that is it, we will see everybody August 20th. So be safe, everybody. Make sure not to get sick and reach out to us. All right. Thank you so much, you guys. Thanks for all the hard work. Bye.
Bye now.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kelly.